Well, some states, California is one of them, have what they call lemon laws, where if you buy a car after a period of a few days, you've got a little window there, and if you don't like it, if it's not turning out the way you like it, then you get to take it back and they don't charge you. It turns out that the U.S. Navy has got some lemons on its hands. We're not going to get a refund, but corrective action is probably better than no action at all. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And gentlemen, this episode is about the fact that we have built a significant number of LCSs. That stands for Littoral Combat Ship. Littoral means areas close to the shore. The people that serve aboard them call them little crappy ships. We built, if I did the numbers correctly, there are two different classes. I think we built 19 Independence class trimarans, and I think we built 16 Freedom class, which look like just really fast and cool PT boats. The idea when these things were constructed, the Independence was commissioned in 2010, and the Freedom was commissioned in 2008. The idea was, at the time, coming off of 9/11, that we would be using an awful lot more of our Navy to do basically anti-terrorist things, insertions, patrols, all the rest of it. And as time has gone on, we find out that that threat from Islamic terrorists has largely subsided, and we're facing a much more aggressive Chinese Navy, so we don't need brown water littoral ships, we need blue water ships. And so having built any number of these things and spent a fair amount of money, we are decommissioning ships that were commissioned 13 years ago. I mean, that's just unheard of. It's unheard of. So Scott, let me start with you here. I've always maintained this attitude. I really try to be fair. I don't blame people for making mistakes. I don't think people make mistakes on purpose. Genuine mistakes, certainly they don't make on purpose. So I'm not faulting the Navy for having built these ships. And in fact, on the contrary, it is entirely possible with the sunk cost fallacy. For those of you not familiar with it, it's the idea that if I've spent a lot of money on something, I've got to keep spending it since I've already got invested. It just means you lose more money. The Navy has decided that these ships, in their own words, are indefensible. They cannot defend themselves in any kind of a combat situation. They were essentially a mistake, and we're going to retire them and replace them with a new class of frigates that I'll get to in a minute. I think it's healthy, despite the fact that we took a while to figure this out, that the Navy is deciding to decommission essentially brand new ships simply because they are not living up to the operational standards that they were sold as. But I think largely because the Navy has realized that this was just the wrong path to go down.
Yeah, and actually, it sounds like a salutary thing to me. I mean, it's that sunk cost fallacy has cost so many people so much money over so much time and so much heartache, frankly, in our own lives, where we cling to things that long ago
that
lost
working.
their relevance. And we just like, well, you know, I've got that law degree, so even though I hate being an attorney, I've got to stay this way. And so I'm actually glad to hear that they're doing that. Now, if this were in active maritime war situation, I think you'd see much more of an inclination to repurpose those ships for something, whatever that they were capable of doing.
Paint them white,
Well, they're
give them
not
to the Coast
capable
Guard.
of doing much, unfortunately. That's why they're being
and
decommissioned.
you would just, I mean, we were invading Normandy in plywood boats, so it's like we would find a way to use these ships. However, because we're not, and because they are pure expense right now, I think decommissioning them is the wise way to go. You know, I don't know if they can scrap them and find something salvageable for use elsewhere, but I'm not enough of a, you know, I don't have the expertise to say whether or not this is a good decision. However, I think in general, most organizations fail to make these kind of decisions, and therefore spend another 3, 4, 5 decades nursing along a program that was never viable in the first place.
And building more of them. And by the way, there's a fair amount of discussion that says that this decision was made, or at least the shortcomings of the little crappy ships was known for quite a while, but they continued to at least keep the shipbuilding facilities open. There are 2 of them, and they kept buying these things essentially so that they wouldn't close down these shipbuilding facilities, of which we do not have many, because there is a replacement coming out. And now, Steve, you and I get to geek out on our little Navy thing. So
I know the replacement. It's a good ship.
It's a good ship too, yes. So the Littoral Combat Ships have been deemed combat ineffective in a modern Navy, and we really are facing a manpower shortage rather than a hull shortage. That's really the Navy's issue. So why have why have sailors at sea crewing vessels that are really not going to help us strategically in terms of controls of the sea lanes? So basically, the United States has been depending for 20 years now or more on Arleigh Burke class destroyers, which in my opinion are the best destroyers ever constructed by any country in the history of the world. They're astonishing platforms. The Navy used to have a smaller class of ship called a frigate. Technically, the littoral combat ships were even smaller than this. They would probably be called a corvette in other navies. But frigates were smaller, and they're less expensive than destroyers. They're not as capable as destroyers, but they do have the advantage of numbers. And the replacement for the littoral combat ships is a brand new frigate class. We haven't had frigates in the Navy for quite a while now, since the Oliver Hazard Perry frigates, I think.
They were retired in the 90s, I think.
Yeah. New class of frigates is the Constellation frigate, and it has 32 vertical launch tubes, not quite as many as an Arleigh Burke class destroyer, but then again, the ship is less expensive. You can buy more of them. You can put more of them out to sea. And by all accounts, this is an extraordinarily potent, smaller, capable, lethal platform, and seems to be exactly the direction that this Navy should be heading, especially given the number of hulls that the Chinese Navy is building.
Yeah, and it's a European design, I believe originally Italian, that for the Constellation class has been it's been given some modifications that better suit the U.S. Navy than the European navies that have been buying. Because I think the Italians have bought them, the Germans have bought them, not the Brits. I don't think they've got them. They've got their new Type 31 frigates, which are supposed to be. I think they're going to be up there with the Arleigh Burkes. But Bill, I gotta take issue. I do blame the Navy, and I do blame Congress for getting us into this mess in a couple of ways. The big problem was right there in the name, the LCS, and I don't mean the cute nickname, the little crappy ship. I mean Littoral Combat Ship. That's not the Navy's job, and they know it. We are a maritime power. We're a trading power. We are a blue water Navy power. And the Navy decided to get hip with the new anti-terror thing and take on a mission that was not theirs.
That's absolutely fair.
End of story. I blame the leadership completely for getting us into this mess. And on Congress's side, one of the reasons we had to go with a European design is there is no slack left in our ship building, in our ship refitting, in anything. We have so little dry dock space for our nuclear aircraft carriers that if one of them needs emergency work, then it upsets the whole schedule for years and years and decades, years down the line. There is no slack left anywhere. Losing our amphib, the Bonhomme Richard.
Bonhomme Richard.
Thank you. A couple of years ago. We don't have the shipbuilding capacity to make good on that loss. What the heck?
And USS Connecticut, one of 3 Seawolf-class subs, probably the best subs, certainly the best subs in the history of the world, attack subs, had a collision, and it's out of action for years now.
Yeah, because there's no slack. What the hell are we going to do in a war when we actually start to lose things and have to replace them at a rate faster than peacetime? And that is on the fault of Congress, which didn't want to spend the money to maintain these vital facilities, and not just the facilities, but the institutional knowledge and the labor skill set that it takes to build a modern warship. It's been 20 years, at least 20 years, of Congress and Navy leadership. I'm not talking about the men and women who actually serve and do the work. Congress and a Navy leadership that have not taken their job seriously. And as a maritime trading power, we have always relied on the Navy to be our first line of defense. Our Navy will always be our first line of defense. And right now, we don't have the Navy we need, and we don't have the ability at current rates to develop the Navy we need.
Well said. It's been my enormous privilege, one of the great honors of my life, to have been invited to spend a day on both the Los Angeles Class 688 attack sub. I was on USS Pasadena for about 7 hours. I've been 600 feet below the surface of the Pacific at 20 knots, and that boat's not even breaking a sweat. It's just walking around at that speed. I've also been on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. I was on USS Spruance, which I want to say is DDG 111. And Arleigh Burke was the chief of naval operations during the early years of the Cold War. He's the only person, I think, to do it have 3 consecutive terms. He was an extremely forward-thinking guy, and the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are they're just the best combat vessels in the world, I think. So what we've got here with the Constellation is a capable little brother of the Arleigh Burkes. The good news is they're not as expensive. That means we can build more of them. We can deploy more of them. There's no substitute for number of hulls when you've got an entire planet to patrol, and that's what we do with the U.S. Navy because, as Steve points out, we are not just a maritime trading power. We are the world's dominant sea power. We keep the sea lanes open for everybody, and for people who don't like that, well, then too bad for you. That's what we do, and that's why we are able to be the manufacturing giant that we are and have the influence that we have. So the first thing really about the Constellation class frigates, they're well armed and everything, but the much more important point, certainly most important point to me, is how do they look? And I think they actually look pretty cool.
They do.
I would have raked the front a little bit. That flat front thing is a little bit like the Oliver Hazard Perrys, but these Constellation class frigates look like they mean business. And when I was aboard USS Spruance, another of the many honors that I've been so fortunate to receive in my life was to sail around San Diego Harbor, San Diego Naval Station, with a 3-star admiral in his launch, and going past the lines of the ships there, and having the entire crew have to come to the side of the ship, standing attention as our tiny little launch went by was a pretty cool feeling. But I got a chance to actually do some genuine journalism on that trip, and I asked this admiral, who was in command of U.S. surface vessels for the Pacific, anything that the Navy owned that floated above the surface in the Pacific was his. He owned it. And I said, Admiral, what do we need right now? And he said exactly what you said, Steve. He said, right now we need maintenance facilities. We need the ability to turn our ships around. We have a significant percentage of our Navy that is in port for maintenance. We cannot get them serviced fast enough. And I said to him at the time, during the Obama administration, I said, well, Admiral, what's holding that up? He said, well, since the Congress has not passed an actual budget, you may recall during the Obama administration, I think we went 4 or 5 years without passing an actual budget, just had, continuing resolutions. The Admiral said, if I have a warship that needs repairs, legislation said that the Navy can't do their own repairs anymore. They have to outsource that to private contractors. Okay. He said, now I go to a shipbuilder and I say, I need this work done on a vehicle, on one of our warships. And that person will sensibly enough say, okay, I'm going to have to hire this many people. I need a guarantee for this much money. This is what it's going to cost to do. Can you sign a contract? And the Admiral said, no, I can't sign a contract because I don't know that the money is going to be there because Congress can't pass a budget. So we've got a quarter of our Navy or a third of our Navy sitting in port waiting for repairs because Congress couldn't have passed a budget. So this is good news. One of the things they're talking about doing with these frigates is it comes down to not just how many hulls you have. It doesn't matter how many ships you have. What matters is how many ships do you have at sea at any given time. You can have a 600-ship Navy, and if 550 of them are sitting in port waiting for repairs, you got a 50-ship Navy. They're talking about doing rotating crews on these frigates. They have a blue crew and a gold crew. They do with this with submarines. So when the ship comes back after a deployment, say it's deployed for 6 to 8 months or something, it normally would come back to port. It would have the same crew. The crew would get some leave, and turnaround time would be about 18 months before it was ready to sail again for another 6-month deployment. The Navy's thinking about going to a blue and gold system where the blue crew takes the ship out, brings it back. Then the gold crew comes in, starts working on new stuff. The blue crew helps get the thing refurbished, and then the gold crew goes out, and the turnaround time is 4 months instead of 18. That's a force multiplier. So all of these solutions are out there. But the thing that is most alarming to me personally is not the quality of the ships. I'm certainly glad we're replacing the LCS with the Constellation-class frigates. I'm concerned about the manpower. I'm concerned about the crews. I'm concerned about whether we have enough people, and I'm very concerned about how qualified the people that we do have are. The vast majority of the Navy is extraordinarily competent and extraordinarily capable, but already all of the armed services are complaining about not being able to meet their numbers, number one, and number two, the people who they're getting are 150 pounds overweight, and many of them can't read. I mean, it's dangerous. So while I'm very happy to see the Constellation class replacing the Littoral Combat Ships, I would be much happier to know that we were getting the best of the best to go out there in harm's way and protect this country at sea, which, as Scott and Steve both pointed out, is our first line of defense, and I think probably the greatest tradition in the United States military. There's never been anything like the U.S. Navy, and I'd like to keep it that way. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Right Angle.